Baldur's Gate 3 has been out for a few weeks now and has seen overwhelming success. It's a truly great game that is a serious contender for Game of the Year. It has also done a great job at reaching a huge audience and has introduced tons of new people to RPGs and more specifically CRPGs. Well, if you're one of those people who is new to CRPGs, luckily for you, there are tons of other great games out there to play when you're done with Baldur's Gate 3. Here are the top 5 games to play if you like Baldur's Gate 3. First up on our list is an obvious one, Divinity Original Sin 2. Divinity Original Sin 2 is Larian's game before Baldur's Gate 3 and shares a lot of the same DNA. Much like Baldur's Gate 3, you have turn-based combat, albeit a little different with an armor system. You have the interactivity with the world, tons of different ways to solve quests, and reactivity to different choices you make in the story, although not as much as you see in Baldur's Gate 3. You're getting a good story that stays interesting throughout the game, and much like Baldur's Gate 3, you can enjoy that story with an origin character or create your own character. The origin stories in Divinity Original Sin 2 are great, and using certain origin characters can dramatically change the experience of your game. If you're looking for a game that is probably the closest you're going to get to Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of mechanics and familiarity, look no farther than Divinity Original Sin 2. I also recommend Divinity Original Sin 1 as it's a great game, but I feel the second improves on almost everything in the first game. Next up on our list is Dragon Age Origins. Made by BioWare, this is peak BioWare. It's essentially fantasy Mass Effect. In this game, you're getting a great story with different endings, lots of choice and consequence, tons of lore to dive into, and it's overall just such a fun game and is a great introduction to these type of games. It has fun combat that is real time with pause, where you can pause the game and issue commands to your party. Also, the game starts differently depending on your race and class, and those choices carry throughout the game. The quests are great and have lots of twists and turns, and the game is full of great writing and voice acting. You also have amazing companions that join you on the adventure. Coming out in 2009, it's one of the older games on this list, but it holds up very well. It's a game where you might spend 50 or more hours on your first playthrough, but there are so many paths to follow, so many details to uncover, and so many ways to customize your party that you'll want to play again as soon as you finish the first time. Third on our list is Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. You want a 100-hour game that feels truly epic the entire way? Want to fight demons? Want to side with demons? Want a game that has choices that can change the story in dramatic ways? Well, this is the game for you. Using the Pathfinder rule set, a similar set of rules to an older Dungeons & Dragons edition, this game lets players create any kind of character they want. There are so many class options and subclasses and multi-classes, so much so that it can be a little overwhelming at times. This game isn't the most beginner-friendly game on the list and can be a little difficult at times. But if you stick with it or use the extensive custom difficulty options, you will be rewarded with a truly great game. Combat is either real-time or fully turn-based, and you can switch at any time. There are tons of spells and abilities. The writing is good and has tons of choice, consequence, and reactivity. You can make a decision in the first few hours of the game that can alter something 50 or even 100 hours later. This game has some flaws, such as the difficulty and assumptions that you know a little bit about the Pathfinder rule set, but if you can get past that, you are rewarded with a great game. Also, I do recommend its predecessor, Pathfinder Kingmaker, as it's a great game and feels more like a traditional Dungeons & Dragons adventure, but I feel Wrath of the Righteous improves so many things from Kingmaker. Next up, we have 2 games, but I am including them as a package. Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. These are some of my favorite games of all time. Made by Obsidian, Pillars of Eternity was the start of the CRPG revival. Where these games shine, in my personal opinion, is the world building. The world Obsidian created for these games is insane and has so much depth and detail. There's so much lore you can dive into. There's even a 100-page book you can get that gives you so much background on the world. But it's not just the world building that makes these games great. The writing is great, and both have a really good story that continues from the first to the second. The first game takes place in a more, I would say, traditional fantasy setting, while the second is more of a pirate adventure. Both games have great quests, great factions, and great stories. but I feel the first game has a better story even though both are still really good. You have lots of choice and consequence, and some of your choices from the first game carry over to the second game, and has a really fun real-time with pause combat system. The games have their own rule set that takes traditional tabletop rule sets and makes it work a little better for a video game. The game embodied nearly everything that's great about old school RPG experiences. The quality of their writing and the attention given to every little detail of the world is remarkable. I highly recommend playing both of these games. I'm adding this next game to the list as an honorable mention. Solasta is a really good game that can scratch the D&D itch. The game is most similar to Baldur's Gate 3 in the combat and using the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set. But where Larian made some of their own changes, Solasta is a true representation of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition combat in a video game form. The story and dialogue aren't the best, but if you're looking for the truest representation of Dungeons & Dragons combat, Solasta is the game for you. Last on our list, we have another pair of games. The games that changed everything and are some of the best games ever made. The originals. Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. If you like Baldur's Gate 3, I recommend going back to see where the series started and see a few characters you might know. Put together, these games form a truly epic Dungeons & Dragons adventure. Starting in Baldur's Gate 1 as a level 1 nobody, you make your way through the Sword Coast, taking your character with you into Baldur's Gate 2, where the epic story concludes. Being the oldest games on this list, they still hold up extremely well and are easier to play than ever thanks to the enhanced editions. The first game is more about the adventure and exploration. It feels like a true low-level Dungeons & Dragons adventure. The second game is all about the story and choice and huge world to explore with great quests and secrets to find. Overall, the games have a great story, good dialogue, fun combat, meaningful decision making, memorable characters, and plenty of replay value. Put together, they are the definitive role-playing experience. If you're a fan of Baldur's Gate 3 and have been captivated by its rich storytelling, engaging gameplay, and immersive world, you're in luck. There is a wealth of fantastic CRPGs out there that offer similar experiences and are sure to satisfy your gaming cravings. Whether you're a newcomer to CRPGs or a seasoned veteran, these titles offer a diverse range of experiences that will keep you immersed in their RPG worlds for countless hours.